Effect of English Empire wars on the colonies. These are the ones we're talking about, the King William's War, Queen Anne's War, King George's War, French and Indian War. They all spilled into the colonies. Okay? In one of those earlier wars, remember the colonists had taken over Fort Lewisburg along the St. Lawrence Riverway. The British then turned it back over to the French for part of India. Made the colonists mad. We won this fair and square and you're turning it back. The Proclamation of 1763. So the French and Indian War ends in 1763, and the first thing the British do is they want to make sure that there are no problems with the Indians in the Ohio River Valley, and the way to make sure there are no problems is to keep colonists out. We're going to stop people coming in and taking over the land. So they issued the proclamation line which says no colonial occupation west of the Appalachian Mountains. Okay? Does this keep the colonists out? Heck no, Daniel Boone's leading them across the mountains as fast as he can. Do the British have a problem? Yes, because that's not where they've stationed their troops. So pretty soon the Indians are going to be really mad, and the British agents are going to be trying to talk to the Indians about fur trade, and there are going to be all these colonists coming into Ohio, Tennessee, etc. Why didn't the colonists like taxes? Well, they thought they already paid enough taxes. Each colony assessed its own taxes to pay for roads. Even in 1770 in Virginia, they were still doing church support, tax-supported churches. Okay, they were most of the colonies by 1776 do away with that totally. So before that, there were still colonies that taxed everyone to pay for churches. The big thing for colonists, too, was they had no representation in Parliament. And they said to him, well, we have no representation and you're taxing us, and Parliament said the next term, which is virtual representation, which means that a guy in Parliament, Mr. Smythe, represents every British citizen, whether you live in Richmond, Virginia, you live in Leeds, England, you live in London, you live in India, no matter where you live, one Englishman represents all Englishmen. And the colonists didn't feel that was true or their interests were being represented. The Sugar Act, which is 1764, was different from the earlier Molasses Act in the early 1700s by A, sugar prices went up, B, colonists consumed more sugar, C, there was a shortage of sugar, D, colonists were represented by Parliament, not colonial legislatures, or E, if, meaning the Sugar Act was enacted to get instant revenues. It's the last one, E. The point of the sugar tax was to get money for England to pay off its debt. Okay? The point of the Molasses Act was to have colonists pay taxes on molasses instead of importing it directly into New England and then making rum out of it. They wanted the molasses to go from Bermuda to England and then back to New England. Okay? The Stamp Act, 1765, what was it? Who did it affect? Why was it hated? What was it? Every piece of paper, whether it was a piece of newsprint or it was a piece of paper that a deed was on, a will, whatever, or a piece of paper for a pamphlet, had to have a watermark or a stamp on it. Okay, so you paid an extra penny tax, we'll say, for each sheet of paper. I'm making up the number. Who did it affect? Everyone, because at some point in time in your life, you bought a pamphlet, you had to get a will, you bought a newspaper, you bought a new Bible, whatever the case might be. Why was it hated? Because everyone had to pay this tax regardless, and it was a tax. Now, did they have a Stamp Act in England? Yes. It was actually higher than the one that they had for the colonies. So the English people were paying even more for their paper goods than were American colonists. Okay? Internal versus external taxes. The Stamp Act was an internal tax, meaning everyone eventually paid it. The Sugar Act was external, meaning that you only paid the tax if you bought the product. So if you didn't want to pay a sugar tax, that's simple. You just buy no sugar. You sweeten everything with honey, which you can get out in the forest when you go out there and rob the honeycomb or whatever you do. Effect of the Stamp Act. Well, one is the next term, which is Stamp Act Congress, where the colonists met together and petitioned Parliament to get rid of the Stamp Act. Their big argument, of course, was no taxation without representation. In the colonies, it started things like the Sons of Liberty came out of the Stamp Act, which was a kind of a vigilante group. Boycotts were encouraged of all British goods, and groups like the Sons of Liberty looked around and made sure that you're not buying British goods, and if you were, they threatened you, they might beat you up. They made effigies of British officials and burned them, beat them, whatever. They actually tore down a statue of George III in New York, and then melted it down and made bullets out of it. The Stamp Act eventually, the colonists put together committees of correspondence, which were letters from Jarrettstown to Cookiestown and telling what they're doing to protest English actions, that kind of thing. The effect of the Stamp Act is to rally, really, the colonists around. Now, the revolution is not going to start, the revolution won't start for another 10 years, but there's that revolutionary spirit already fomenting. Why did the power of colonial assemblies grow? Well, colonists began to recognize that that's where they wanted their governing body to be, was colonial legislatures, so they gave them more support. As there was more revolutionary fervor and spirit, the colonists started looking to them for guidance. Okay, it was colonial legislatures which put together militia units, for instance, that type of thing. Currency Act, 1764, its effect. It took away paper money. The colonies and paper money, which is, oh, I thought there wasn't one that said, paper money in the colonies, right after it, sure. The British wanted the colonists to use all British money, which were coins made out of gold, silver, copper, okay? But during the French and Indian War, there wasn't enough money in circulation for trade, so the British government allowed the colonies to print paper money. Each colony printed their own money. The problem was there were all these currencies running around, and when you print money, it tends to cause inflation, which is another problem. So the British ultimately wanted to stop the practice of printing money, which is what the Currency Act does. It causes a cash flow problem in America. Okay? Quartering Act. Also passed in 1764, or 64 or 65, I have to look up the exact year, but I think 64. Said that the colonists had to help pay for the British soldiers who were in the colonies by providing them with bedding, which means the straw to be inside the mattress. They had to provide them with candles, with vinegar, with salt, with various booze or alcohol, etc. Okay? They made the colonists mad because they felt like even though this wasn't a direct tax, it was an indirect tax, because if you had troops stationed in Boston, the Bostonian people were taxed by the government. They had to come up with this stuff, okay, one way or the other. If you lived in Richmond, Virginia, you probably didn't get affected by it because there were no British troops stationed there, which made it a lot cheaper to live there than Boston, for instance.